A very good evening to you, and thank you very much for tuning into Metropol TV. I am Undiro Ganga, and this is Metropol Debrief. Tonight on the show, what do we have for you? We will be unpacking the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, looking into every corner of it, dissecting it with Ambassador Erastus Mwenche, who's the former Deputy Chairperson of the African Union. But first, before we get into the deep conversation, let's lay some very interesting facts down on the ground. Now, Kenya is one of the largest producers of flowers in the continent. Every time an aeroplane lifts off the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport on its way to Europe, there is a high likelihood that it is carrying a flower consignment that will end up at the Royal Flora Holland, the greatest flower auction market in the world. Now, the Dutch Flower Group processes 10 billion stems a year, worth the equivalent of 564 billion Kenya shillings. Now, however, if you buy a bouquet of flowers in Lagos, Nigeria, they would have probably gone through Holland. If you buy a bouquet of flowers in Nigeria, they've gone through Holland. Why not Nairobi to Lagos? Now, this is how karma works. Nigeria, meanwhile, is the largest producer of palm oil across the continent. In fact, Nigeria ranks third in the world in terms of land area planted with palm oil, but is only the fifth largest palm oil producer due to low yield. Now, Nigeria plans to invest over $500 billion to increase its palm oil production from around 600,000 tons to a year to 5 million tons by the year 2027. However, this is where the catch is. Kenya buys its palm oil from Malaysia. African countries don't trade with each other. In Europe, 70% of trade happens within the continent. In Asia, slightly above half, at 51% of the trade happens within the confines of Asian countries. Now, in Africa, the number stands dismally at 16%. Now, most of the raw materials produced in Africa are exported out of the continent for value addition before they are brought back into the continent and sold at exorbitant prices. Cocoa in Ghana is the perfect example. It goes out of the continent to be processed and comes back as chocolate. Well, there you have it. This is the problem African leaders are trying to solve as they come together to sign and ratify the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Now, out of a total of 55 countries, the 56 countries in the continent, all of them have signed, save for Eritrea. Now, this means all African countries agree to trade more with each other, reducing barriers like tariffs, where the African Union revenue loss is equivalent to 9.1% of current revenues it makes a year. Now, this is in line with the Vision Africa 2063, which states the Africa we want. Now, Africa's population, 1.2 billion, and this population is expected to rise to 1.7 billion by the year 2030, and the GDP, 2.3 trillion US dollars. Now, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is expected to catapult economic growth in the continent. A free trade area is supposed to boost the number to growth to 60%, boosting job opportunities, regional integration, and promoting African interventions and innovations, African solutions solving African problems. Now, to actualize this, African leaders intend to go borderless, introduce the African passport and the African visa processing system upon arrival. Now, however, there are barriers that hinder this kind of Pan-African integration, including security, border regulation, tariffs, and most importantly, infrastructure, because, you know, the connectivity between Africa is very poor. 80 to 90% of goods in Africa move by road, yet our road connectivity is something else. Now, transportation costs in Africa represent about 70% of the value of exports compared to 20% in the rest of the world. Now, although road transport accounts for about 80 to 90%, as I had mentioned earlier, of all the freight and passenger movement in Africa, only 24% of roads are paved. Wait a minute, 24%. Now, here's where it all gets interesting. A 1% increase in transport and telecommunication and infrastructure investment would result in a 3% increase in export to other African countries. That is why tonight we seek to answer the question, what does the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement mean for the Kenyan economy, Kenyan businesses, the Kenyan in person, and the African continent. After the break, I am joined by former Vice Chairman Ambassador Erastus Mwenche to the AU to contextualize this agreement. Stay with Metropol TV.